Minti Kitchinidam Nongo Maya. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the United Nations Association in Canada's very special gathering. My name is Jasmine Jackman. I am proud to serve as past president of our Toronto Regional Branch and as the regional representative for Ontario and the National Board of Directors. Please do consider becoming a member. Like the UN itself, this year we are celebrating 75 years of active public engagement and outreach in support of this essential global organization. In the spirit of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, let me start by recognizing that we are gathered together today on various traditional territories. Here in the Greater Toronto area, where I am, we acknowledge several nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, who have been stewards of this land since time immemorial. The GTA is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis peoples. We give homage to the elders past, present, and future as we grow in awareness and push forward to understanding, to action. We acknowledge the harms and the mistakes of the past and that we each have a role to play in creating new spaces of equity, diversity, and inclusion in order to move forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you all for being a part of this important event. We would have loved to be together, as we have been in previous years, to pay tribute to a truly remarkable Canadian we are privileged to honor as our 2020 Global Citizen, Mark Carney. Circumstances, however, have dictated that we gather virtually. In spite of this median, it is even more important in 2020 that we showcase his work, life, and commitment to a more equitable future. UNA Canada has also seized this challenging historical moment to hear from Mark and our distinguished armchair guests to invite their views on our way through and out of these challenging times. The United Nations Association in Canada is a vibrant historical national civil society organization, providing a leading policy voice on multilateralism in Canada. Its innovative programming engages a network of volunteer branches across the country, along with some 30,000 members and supporters. Our mission is to educate and engage Canadians in the work of the UN and the critical international issues that affect us all. We believe that a strong and effective United Nations is essential if we are to secure a future based on equality, dignity, and justice for all. UNA Canada is dedicated to promoting constructive Canadian participation in the United Nations system and the growing citizens in Canada who embrace the principles of the UN Charter. Before turning the podium to our President and CEO, Catherine White, I am privileged to share an important message from the Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Justin Trudeau. It is with great pleasure that I welcome everyone to the 2020 Global Citizen Award ceremony hosted by the United Nations Association in Canada. Today, I am delighted to join you in honoring the 2020 Global Citizen Laureate, Mr. Mark Carney, for his numerous accomplishments. He has held important and distinguished positions, such as serving as the Governor of the Bank of Canada, the Governor of the Bank of England, to now being the United Nations Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance. Mr. Carney is a great leader who has provided effective solutions to critical problems. His impeccable track record of impact and sustained excellence has allowed him to gain the confidence and support of Canadians and individuals worldwide. On behalf of the Government of Canada, I would like to congratulate Mr. Carney on receiving this well-deserved honor. Right now, organizing and hosting events such as this one has never been more difficult. And I would like to thank the United Nations of Canada for making this event possible. Please accept my best wishes for a wonderful event. The Right Honorable Justin Trudeau. I am pleased to share a message from the UN Secretary General. It is a pleasure to greet the United Nations Association of Canada. in this year in which the United Nations marks its 75th anniversary. I thank you for being among our best friends and indispensable partners. You are critical to sharing the UN story of advancing peace, justice, and equality, health, and human rights for all. The work is more important than ever as we strive to overcome COVID-19 and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. The pandemic is a wake-up call. We cannot go back to pre-COVID world of inequalities and fragilities, and we must do more to respond to a world of challenges ahead, the climate crisis above all. This is why I'm especially delighted to add my voice to yours in honoring Mark Carney, my special envoy on climate action and finance. Today, the state of our planet is broken, with new heights of global heating, new lows of ecological degradation, and new setbacks in our work towards sustainable development goals. Mark is among those leading the way to fix it. As United Nations Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance, he is playing an instrumental role in efforts to build a sustainable and financial system. He is helping to lead the charge for carbon neutrality by the middle of the century, including by pushing for mandatory disclosure of climate-related financial risk and pressing to ensure that every business and financial decisions takes climate change into account. His renowned 2015 speech, Breaking the Tragedy of Horizon, continues to be a touchstone for his work. On climate change and across the international agenda, now is the time to strengthen international cooperation for the common good. I thank the UNA Canada for doing just that. Let's work together for the future we want and the United Nations we need. And a special greeting will be shared with Mr. Carney via Downing Street. From that, Mr. Carney, let me now turn to Kate White, a woman who has led this organization with creativity and distinction for 17 years. Madame White, miigwech, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Jasmine. And thank you to Prime Minister Trudeau and Secretary General Guterres. A hard act to follow. And in fact, important to acknowledge this, this new mode of celebrating. I think those messages show how valued our 2020 laureate is, and I hope a little bit of our work. And thank you for reminding us, Jasmine, of another celebration that COVID has spoiled. The UN and UNA Canada is both marking our 75-year history. In fact, UNA Canada is technically 100 years old. We were the Canadian Council for the League of Nations, which speaks to Canadians' valuing of multilateralism, I think important to us all. I'd also, of course, state the obvious, which is 75 years ago, there was another ugly and devastating crisis that brought us to the table of looking for solutions together. So I would like to add my welcome to our 2020 Global Citizen Laureate, to previous laureates, Terry Hoy, Wally Solomon, and Louis Bachand, to presenting sponsors RBC National Bank with Concord Pacific and Bloomberg Philanthropies, partners, supporters, distinguished guests, staff, volunteers, UNA Canada program participants, alum, and friends. This is a very special occasion in the United Nations Association calendar. It's our mandate to grow global citizens, and our annual Global Citizen presentation is a moment to really illuminate a uniquely contributing Canadian citizen. Mark Carney, as you just heard from others, is a role model of how national and global public service and social and financial innovation can foster a more inclusive, fair, and sustainable world. He has achieved prominence as an economist and central banker, having served, as you've heard, as the governor of the Bank of England, and of course, oh yes, the governor of the Bank of Canada. And Mark is now the vice chair of Brookfield Asset Management and head of ESG, which is environmental, social, and corporate governance and impact fund investing. So he's moved through central banking and regulation to actually implementing sustainable investment. Mr. Carney, as you heard, has also accepted these appointments both as the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance, taking over that role from Michael Bloomberg, but also he has a role as the finance advisor to COP26, also known as the Conference of the Parties for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. In UN agencies like ours, it's always important to spell out what those initials stand for. Both of these appointments focus on ambitious implementation of climate action. The goal is to significantly shift public and private finance markets and mobilize private finance to the levels needed to achieve the 1.5 goal of limited emission growth of the Paris Agreement. Mark Carney has moved seamlessly from the financial crisis as the governor of the Bank of Canada to Brexit while at the Bank of England. And so for a little break, he is tasked with building the financial framework and commitments for reaching one of the life of the very planet targets of climate action and investment, which underpins poverty reduction implicit in all of the sustainable development goals. But I'm an optimist, and clearly so is he. So just in case the task was not quite challenging enough, we confront this crisis in the coming days and months and years as we also address the new challenges imposed on all of us by COVID-19. And let me take a brief pause here to offer condolences to anybody with us who has lost a friend or a family member or is confronting the uncertainty of this plague yourself. Mr. Carney is uniquely qualified to bring attention and action to mainstream of private financial decision-making and to support the transition to a net zero carbon economy. You even heard it from the Secretary General of the UN. As for that Carney optimism, next spring he will release a book on ways we must build a more inclusive society in the wake of COVID-19. Values, building a better world for all. You will hear much more about Mark Carney and from Mr. Carney, but let me tell you two things of which I am certain. Mark Carney understood and was speaking up about the need for climate action well before his more public roles. So thank you for your vision and your tenacity. Secondly, I am certain that his success and commitment has been bolstered at difficult times and elevated by another inspiring climate leader under his roof, Diana Fox Carney. I'm glad to have her back in Canada too. So let me turn to some very special thank yous in support of our Global Citizen Award. To the bibliophile and CEO of National Bank and a Global Citizen Laureate himself, Louis Vachon. Thank you too for your support of the financial internship program with UNA Canada in Cambodia, together with the UN Development Program. Thank you to RBC. The RBC Foundation and their remarkable team led by Valerie Chort has contributed in many ways to UNA Canada's program, Building Young Entrepreneurs, which focuses on talented, aspiring entrepreneurs, most of whom are racialized and are confronting multiple barriers in their young lives and their paths to success. Building Young Entrepreneurs is the latest in an almost 2-decade-long focus on diversity, inclusion, and equity of UNA Canada. Doug Guzman, who you'll hear from, Group Head, Wealth Management, Insurance, Investor and Treasury Services, and Deputy Chair, Capital Markets, is about to introduce you more fully to Mark, but Doug himself is a well-recognized industry leader and bringing climate action to the full portfolio of RBC's work. Thank you to Walid Solomon, who will moderate the armchair conversation that will follow Mark's remarks. Our 2019 laureate, he is the global chair of Norton Rose Fulbright, a man deeply engaged with the world around him and clear in meeting his responsibilities to contribute to his society and doing it well. Thank you to Terry Hoy of Concord Pacific. Terry is a global citizen laureate who continues to lead on innovative climate impact reduction, and with whom UNA Canada has brought together young Inuit emerging leaders for perspectives on Arctic impacts of climate change and soon youth consultations on oceans and food. I'd like to also acknowledge UNA Canada's board of directors. They're my bosses. So Jasmine, you've met, and you'll meet Victoria as well, our vice chair, but there are others with us today too. I'm also pleased to give a shout out to Louise Blais, who is Canada's Deputy Ambassador to the UN, who is with us today. I hope you'd be with us anyway, Louise, but she's also representing our ambassador last minute with an obligation at the UN. To all of you, some longstanding partners and friends and some new friends, thank you so much. And if you would allow me just to quickly give you a glimpse of the amazing body of work we do every day, achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. I should have said that more articulately. I say it many times, the Sustainable Development Goals, through mobilizing the power of youth, of communities, of the private sector and governments in Canada and internationally. UNA Canada launched Canada Green Corps, a program that I am proud to have seeded the creation of. The program places talented or underemployed grads with green startups and that are SMEs, bringing small and medium-sized enterprises, bringing their new knowledge and skills to a sector we must ignite. The program has launched the careers of over 1,000 young Canadians and the green economy. Green Corps now focuses on STEM placements. Meanwhile, is community action and youth leadership for Canada to achieve our commitments. UNA Canada also has programs that you probably could guess we would too. UN internship placements through the International Development and Diplomacy Internship Program and the Youth Internship Program. We also send youth delegations to important UN meetings through Canada Service Corps International, Canadian International Model UN. Many talented diplomats and experts start with Model UN. Keep that in mind. And of course, innovative programming with alliances with UN partners and the World Federation of the United Nations Association. Meanwhile, our network of historic volunteer branches across the country deliver innovative programming to their communities on pressing global issues that also impact Canada. We are so proud of your work. It is a challenging time for charities, though, to reach and lift communities, youth, young girls and women, and to build intergenerational links with those who have lived experiences and solutions to share. We depend on support and generosity of our donors and our partners and investors, and we are truly grateful for this support. May I give my special thanks to UNA Canada's talented team making this important event happen, James Lee, Joan Broughton, a full-time volunteer of almost 2 decades, by the way, and I think she'd let me say that she passed the 80-year mark and puts many of us to shame, and this is what keeps charities running too. To Sarah Jarvis and the whole team, and those vital team members of our partners as well. And just before I hand over the Zoom floor to Doug Guzman, a pretty amazing climate champion at RBC, to introduce our 2020 Global Citizen Laureate. One final message right now from Mr. Michael Bloomberg.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here with Prime Minister Trudeau, Prime Minister Johnson, Secretary General Guterres, and all of you to recognize Mark Carney with UNA Canada's 2020 Global Citizens Award. I've gotten the chance to work closely with Mark to fight climate change through the financial sector, and I've seen his strong leadership on this issue firsthand. He's been a great partner, and I have a lot of respect for his work. In fact, the moment he became available, I asked him to join the board of my foundation. Mark understands that mobilizing businesses, banks, and regulators and increasing transparency are a crucial part of reducing emissions. That's why he and I launched the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures when he led the Financial Stability Board. At the TCFD, we've created standards for companies to disclose critical information about the impact of climate change on their businesses to lenders, insurers, investors, and other stakeholders. That disclosure helps executives and investors make better, more informed decisions. And that's good not only for the climate, but also for the economy. Fighting climate change and strengthening the economy really do go hand in hand, especially now as we work to recover from the economic devastation caused by COVID-19. I'm glad to say our disclosure recommendations have been endorsed by more than 1,500 organizations in the public and private sectors, and the UK just became the first G20 country to make TCFD climate disclosures mandatory. I want to thank Mark for all his leadership in helping to build a more sustainable and resilient economy with good new jobs and clean energy. Working together, we can do it, and I know Mark will continue helping to lead the way.
Thanks, Michael. I guess I've had the pleasure of knowing Mark for about 25 years. I'm very honored to have a chance to spend some time with you today. I met Mark as a mid-level investment banker. In fact, we were both mid-level investment bankers at an investment bank you could probably guess. And among other things, we were the first to come to Canada and open a Canadian office, which we did in Toronto. And I met Mark as I know him now, an incredibly well-rounded individual. I was and continue to be struck by his breadth, from rural Canada background, obviously, to a life in world centers, even before I met him, having spent time in North American centers, London, Tokyo, and traveling just about everywhere else. An unusual combination of left and right brain, creativity and logic, a setter of monetary policy, as has been alluded to by prior speakers, who comments on political issues and essential threats to the planet, sometimes to his own detriment. Very strong people skills, but very striking analytical capabilities. And a confidence that you've all seen, but also an ability to share a pint with a junior team member or a long ago school friend. Really just an extraordinary talent with unusual balance. At least that's what he was like when I worked with him. I don't know what 15 years at central banks has done. Now I'm not really sure. Of course I joke, because I am sure. I am one of the many that Mark has kept in touch with over the years. He does not forget where he's from. He does not forget friends. He does not forget home. In fact, in our preparation for this panel just yesterday, a number of the panelists and organizers commented how they knew Mark one way or another, and you could tell that it meant something to everyone, and he's very good at it. Many friends and former colleagues have seen the inside of the old lady of Threadneedle, the headquarters of the Bank of England, and been hosted by Mark on brief tours around the building. Not everyone would do that, and people value it. I came to know Mark's interest in climate quite early on. Diana has been mentioned, and I to be honest, I came to know it through Diana first. As you know, Diana contributes to the topic in a number of ways, on the academic front, the professional front, volunteer front. She has written and contributed on a number of different topics related to climate. I was, as they moved to the UK, a subscriber to an e-newsletter that she put out called Eco Products That Work, that focused on reduction and reuse. She questioned shipping of soap around the world because of its water content, and she questioned bleaching of tea bags for tea. In fact, when Mark and Diana got to England, I understand that the famous bookie Ladbrokes actually offered 50-to-1 odds that the bleached tea bags would be banned. If that's not a comment on the power of the Carneys, I don't know what is. The bookies believed there was some chance that the Carneys could get Britons to change their tea consumption. A true test, though, of commitment to climate and environment was perhaps, at least for me, the sticking with cloth diapers through not just the first daughter and the second, but the third and the fourth. That, to me, is real commitment. Among his signature achievements, as was just mentioned, is the TCFD and his oft-cited 2015 paper addressing the tragedy of horizons and the implications of decisions today that aren't seen until much later, by definition, run the risk of misallocating resources and capital and making bad decisions, and therefore the need for better disclosure and regulation, common taxonomy, definition, scenario analysis, and as you saw in the FT today, a price for carbon, a price for carbon offsets in a very sizable way to help people get through it. What's obvious about Mark as a person is, in some ways, his immunity to seeing the traditional boundaries of his role. He's willing to go where there is impact, whether or not everyone in the room believes that to be polite on that day. He describes his comments around Brexit not as political, but rather failure to make comments would have been political. And the requirement to express a view was an obligation of the Post, wading fearlessly into sensitive space because he could have impact. He's infused climate into much of what he's done, whether some saw that as a stretch at the time or not. And of course now, central banks writ large, political parties, well, most political parties in most countries, but corporates, certainly investors, are all much closer to Mark's original position and point of view on the topic than their own original positions. The same refusal to be bound by the practice of his predecessors can be seen in his path through the years. He took a multiple degree academic background, first to a trading floor, which is a bit unusual, and then to advising CEOs as an investment banker, while the rest of us had to train for years to get to the point where we could do that. Then, as has been mentioned, to central banker, to a policymaker in finance, tackling some of the country's trickiest files, the tax files and income trust files, back to central banker role to one bank and to run one bank and then another. And now he's embarked as an investor on advising some of the most sophisticated investors in the world. It's only a slight exaggeration to say that he doesn't see the need for traditional training before wading in and making an impact. And I expect that'll be no different in his current and future endeavors. I wish I had Mark's confidence, but more than that, I wish I had his abilities. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce a truly great Canadian, Mark Carney.
Wow. Okay, I think I'm unmuted, but I am muted. I'm unmuted, but muted. I'm momentarily speechless. I'm very touched, Doug, by those comments coming from you, a great friend and a remarkable individual, remarkable professional, but a great Canadian himself. So coming from you, Doug, that means a tremendous amount. And Louis, to have you here as well, and Terry Huey, and everything you've done, Waleed. It's an honor. I'm looking forward to our chance to have a discussion about some of these issues in a moment. You're gonna have to wait. I'm gonna make you wait though, because I'm gonna say a few words. But before I do, let me thank the United Nations Association for this honor, but really for what you've done and what you're doing and what you will do, what you've done for the last 75 plus years. Starting with the League of Nations. I like that heritage, and it's very important to underscore it. But holding the flag high, inspiring Canadians and inspiring people around the world, and to make a better world. And never has it been more important. And I think you heard at the start, look, the reason why we had testimonials from Prime Minister Trudeau and acknowledgement from Downing Street and Mike Bloomberg is the importance of international cooperation, importance of the values that you hold up. And importantly, part of those values and part of what you do is inspiring young Canadians from all walks of life, from all parts of the country to underscore the contributions they can make today and in the future, and how important those impacts can be. And what I thought I would do, if you'll bear with me, I think you granted me, I'm going to take 15 minutes, whether you granted it to me or not. I'm taking control of this conversation, is to offer a few reflections on the future of international cooperation, obviously within the context of the UN, but also in the context of some of the forces that we're all living through. And I want to go back to when I was a graduate student. Which I was fortunate, I got a scholarship. I did my graduate work at Oxford, and I used to take the bus from Oxford to London. There was more to do in London than Oxford. I figured that out eventually. So you take the bus from one to the other, and I would keep my eye out for a landmark. And the landmark was not the dreaming spires of the university or the bright lights of London, but as you, those of you who've been to Oxford, if you notice, as you go out of the town about 20 minutes out, you go through another town called Headington, and in one of those English nondescript row house streets, there is a house with a giant shark on the roof, a giant shark coming through the roof, sculpted into it. It was, kind of, you don't see that every day. In fact, I've never seen it anywhere else. And I sort of reflected on it, thought, what was the point? I did a bit of research, and the man who had put it there, he placed it there after the Chernobyl disaster. And the point was, there was a point to this, not just to irritate his neighbors, although it did apparently irritate his neighbors quite a bit, but was that we're not safe. We're not safe, or that things from outside our borders spill over and affect us. And he was a campaigner for nuclear disarmament, and of course the Chernobyl and the fallout from that nuclear disaster extended, including to the UK and to a limited extent. And the point of the story is that there are a number of things that go, and I've sort of reflected over my life and tried to work on some of them, issues that spill across borders, both positively and negatively. And so think about the financial crisis. I mean, Doug and Louis, and I worked very closely with both of them. Louis, I can remember some very long nights and many phone calls during the 2008 financial crisis, which we received from abroad. We absolutely received from abroad, and had to fight and had to address. So you have negative financial spillovers, if you will. We have cybercrime and issues around data that spill across borders. And of course, we have climate change as a classic example that spill across borders. So we have all these risks, and how do we manage against those risks? But at the same time, we have amazing positive flows across borders, personal flows, culture, creativity, innovation, vaccines, which will hopefully see some of those spill across borders sooner rather than later. Entrepreneurship, Terry is a classic example. Terry Huey is a classic example of entrepreneurs investing across borders to make a better Canada, a better world. So how do we get the balance right of openness of borders and I think recognizing that has been under threat, and there have been times when things have flowed much more readily across borders. And Doug mentioned a moment ago that I was happy to host him and Louis as well, and others would come through and go through the Bank of England, which is an amazing, as you'd expect, it's quite an amazing, amazing building. And always, I have to say, the number of times I thought, what am I doing here? What's happened to the empire? How did I end up in this position? It took a pretty big crisis, I can assure you, to get a foreigner in there, and I'm not sure we'll see another one after my run. But you're in that building, and there's very much, you have a sense of the age of empire, of the British Empire. There's lots of allusions to it. Just the wealth of it also alludes to that. And you think about, that was the time of globalization where you had absolutely open borders, movements of people, mass movement of people, huge flows of capital and trade. Canada was built during that era in many respects. We used to run a trade deficit of 10% of our GDP, which is a huge number. And we did that for 30 years, over a period in which we doubled our population with immigration flows. And at that time, there were no institutions that really underpinned that. You had the gold standard, which was a convention, not a set of rules. The only international institutions were things like the International Telegraph Union. You enforced property rights with gunboats, effectively, with military power. It wasn't, in the end, a stable system. It wasn't the sole contributor, but one of the contributors to the so-called Great War. And it was after that sort of looking back to the past led to some very difficult times in the UK. And I was reminded of this directly when I started. It's literally on my first day at the bank. I rearranged some of I guess I shouldn't have done this, but I rearranged some of the furniture, some of the art, and I moved one of the many paintings of a guy named Montague Norman, who had been governor of the Bank of England for 20 years during a difficult time, the 20s and 30s, actually through the middle of the 40s as well. And George Osborne, who was the chancellor at the time, so the Minister of Finance at the time, called up literally, that day and said, "I heard you took down this painting of Montague Norman," which told me that, maybe things weren't quite as separate between the bank and the Treasury. There was information flows were there, and he said he wanted to borrow it, and I lent it to him. And the reason he wanted to borrow it is he hung it, and it still hangs there today in the dining room of number 11 Downing Street, which is this amazing, ornate room. And the reason for that is that was the room where Montague Norman, as governor then, convinced Winston Churchill, when he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, to go back onto the gold standard at the pre-war parity. And that was a decision taken in the mid-1920s that plunged the UK into one of its worst recessions that it only started to emerge from when the Great Depression came and knocked it flat on its back. And it was this sort of clinging to old certainties that undid them. It also, George put it up in order to remind himself, quote, never to listen to the advice of the governor of the Bank of England, which I must say he lived up to that to that maxim while he was there. So keep that in mind: don't listen to the advice of the former governor of the Bank of England. As I offer a few reflections on, how do we rebuild this system? So you had a system pre-war, which basically didn't have institutions. It breaks down in the interwar period. And then we emerge from the Second World War, foundation of the UN, foundation of the other Bretton Woods institutions, and an architecture is put in place for the system. And it works exceptionally well for a number of decades. Gradually, and it's reinforced by the liberalization of economic policy in the 1980s. It's reinforced by Deng Xiaoping's reforms in China, the fall of communism, the extension of China to the WTO on the economic side. These are all lifting up prosperity. And one of the challenges, though, is that, and I'm speaking from an economic perspective, is that gradually the sharing of these benefits becomes more and more unequal. And that on top of that, some fault lines build up within the financial sector that aren't really appreciated and only come out in the 2007-8 crisis, which Louis and I and Doug and others worked very hard to kind of stop at the borders of Canada. But it leaves lasting scars. And what we've lived through subsequent to that, in my judgment, the fallout from the crisis, financial crisis, reinforced by technology, has been that for many of our fellow citizens, what globalization and openness has meant more of the shark, if you will, than the opportunities that come from swimming in a bigger pond. It's meant lower wages, stateless corporations, insecure jobs, and rising inequalities. And the rules-based architecture that had underpinned openness has been under great strain. We know the challenges of the WTO, climate policies. For a period of time, climate policies were under real pressure, and part of this is because of this challenge between making rules at an international level and respecting domestic sovereignty. And having economic integration, democracy, and international rules, and that's a very tough triangle to square. It's tough enough to square a circle. It's tough to square a triangle. But I think we can do it, and we have done some of that. And I'm just make a couple of comments on areas where we can. And what I wanted to do is just draw on the experience of the Financial Stability Board, because what that did, granted, it had the benefit of a crisis and a need to fix something, but it had a form of cooperative internationalism. And it was a very Canadian approach. Focus on outcomes. So let's figure out the way to get a more stable financial system that serves more people. It involved multiple stakeholders. Everything we do in this country, to its credit, involves that everything we do that works, I should say, involves multiple stakeholders and a process that draws on the diversity of the country and builds from that diversity. And of course, it takes longer and it requires negotiation and water in various people's minds, but it ultimately succeeds. And one of the reasons it succeeds, and this was the experience of the FSB, is that if people are involved in a process, particularly at the international level, and then they go home, they own the result. And of course, they implement. And when regulators and central bankers and others would go back from these meetings of the FSB to implement, they would make some tweaks here or there that were consistent with their own systems, but effectively the whole system was raised up. And I was pleased. One of the highlights, I think, of my time in public service was the Hamburg summit. Not because of the riots, which were fantastic, I have to say. They were like some of the best riots I've seen at a G20. But the meetings, at the core of the meeting was delivering the 100 reforms that the FSB had worked on for several years, and getting the endorsement and making sure that they were followed through. So to me, the lesson of that for international cooperation in our age is you need a clear mission and a political backing that comes. You have to have that political backing. You need to bring the right people around the table, but the right people is quite a diverse set of stakeholders. You have to embrace that diversity and run processes to get the answers in order to instill that ownership. And I think there are a few, to sort of move towards ending on a positive note. There are several areas where this can be applied. One of them is the new trade architecture. How are we going to continue to advance trade? Part of that, if we need to liberalize trade and services, if we were to liberalize trade and services the extent we've done that in goods, we would more than double the volume of trade. Trade and services is much more, services are much more heavily weighted towards women. There's bigger, so it's a more inclusive form of growth. And it has a much bigger impact on small and medium-sized enterprises, positive impact on small and medium-sized enterprises, which goes to my next point is we should really be working, and there is an opportunity to work on building off e-commerce platforms such as Shopify to make it much even easier for our smaller businesses to be active globally, not just locally. With respect to that point, I think we can draw on the strengths of our financial system, which is really without parallel, to advance a new digital era of cross-border finance. And this has been a Canadian strength, international finance, since Graham Towers, the first governor of the Bank of Canada, David Dodge. We're in the first tier of banking, represented by two of the individuals here today and their institutions. We have tremendous credibility in data, artificial intelligence, and privacy. All of these are the building blocks of a new digital global financial system, and we can help set the architecture for that. And then, of course, you would expect me to mention on climate, where we can very much lead on that. And I'll just finish on this, which is because I think it's indicative of how the UN has evolved in the best of the UN, which is the COP26 process, or the Conference of the Parties, as Kate, you rightly noted, it's 195 countries, soon hopefully to be 196, or well, actually almost assuredly to be 196 with the US rejoining. And there's a very, very important structured process pioneered in Paris that will be followed through to Glasgow. But in parallel and in support, and almost as important, is the process with the broader stakeholder groups, with the NGOs, with the state and local governments, with educators, with youth, with business, with finance, that are all moving towards achieving this goal and are all necessary to achieve the goal of net zero. And at the heart, not at the heart of that, but supporting all of that are the reforms that we're looking to make to private finance. Again, very much supported by the best in Canada. I noted, I should underscore the other day that our 8 largest pension funds called for the mandatory disclosure of what Mike Bloomberg was talking about earlier. And by the way, that's something that only started 5 years ago. The concept started 5 years ago. The application will fully take place in Glasgow. We need to build the carbon market that Doug referenced. But just generally, we need to have everybody pulling in the same direction, which, as our youth have demanded, as they deserve, is a transition to net zero, and we can help lead the way. So, with that, let me thank you again for this opportunity, for this honor, but also the opportunity to see old friends, meet new ones, and try to give back. And I just say that we often say the world needs more Canada. I think it does. It needs more Canada in terms of what we can teach, in terms of how to get things done. And we can help make the water safe from those sharks, and we can enjoy it. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it to, I'm going to thank you again, and I'm going to hand it to Victoria, I believe.
Thank you so much, Mark, for those inspiring and important lessons. A Better World for All is both a subtitle of your book, which we look forward to reading this spring, and the vision for UNA Canada itself. We couldn't agree more that we must guide our future to truly build a better world for all. As Mark said, my name is Victoria Borelli, and I'm honored to serve as the Vice Chair of the Board of UNA Canada. My belief is that civil society organizations like UNA Canada have an important role in shaping, co-creating, innovating, and sometimes holding feet to the fire towards building that better world for all. I'd like to thank UNA Canada's President and CEO, Kate White, for her vision and leadership over the last 17 years, specifically for bringing diverse voices, sectors, and thinking together toward a climate-smart future for all, and for showcasing role models like Mark Carney. Mark has displayed mettle and courage in the face of crisis. I believe the world must now, with his guidance, confront climate change at the same time as we meet the challenges of COVID-19. And now, I have the great pleasure of acknowledging our 2020 Global Citizen Laureate. I do so on behalf of our board, our staff, our members, and our volunteer branches across the country. So Mark, I will pass you this award from Toronto to Ottawa, and I'd ask that you all please join me in congratulating Mark Carney, our 2020 UNA Canada Global Citizen Laureate. Send applause, Mark.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Thank you all. It's good.
Well, thank you very much for that, Victoria. Very much appreciated to actually hand that over. That sleight of hand is amazing. I did offer for Mark to give us a sense of his own pathway. And of course, he modestly instead gave us a master class on global financing and the issues that we confront. So thank you for that. And now, of course, that you're officially our 2020 Global Citizen Laureate, we're going to put you to work along with your eminent and well-placed colleagues to speak to how we confront the most vexing issues of the day. And I am sure that our moderator is going to do exactly, hold your feet to the fire, which is usually the role, of course, of civil society. As hopeful as we may feel at the news of the arrival of vaccines, I think all of us today understand, especially civil society, I think all of us get that for those who are most vulnerable, that there's no vaccine against poverty, there's no vaccine against racism or injustice. There is just awareness, understanding, and action. And now, in many ways, it falls to the people who can make the difference of those kinds of investments. I, for one, am very proud of UNA Canada's work at the intersection of sectors where civil society, like UNA Canada, can throw a spotlight where we see real leadership, as much as we must also roll up our sleeves together where we see we can bring more equality, innovation, and fairness towards building a better world together.